Mare stood outside the boutique, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow on her face, yet it couldn't soothe the searing pain on her cheek from the slap she had just received. She pulled out her phone, her hand trembling, not from fear, but from anger. The dress she hadn't been allowed to try on, Sarah's contemptuous glare, these thoughts dug deep into her mind. She opened her video recording app, holding the phone steady in her grip. Her voice was firm, though there was a slight tremble. "I'm Mare O'Neal, and today, in this store, I was slapped. It wasn't just a slap, it was an insult, and I can't stay silent. This story isn't just about the slap, it's about demanding justice and creating change. Don't forget to follow and share to help spread this message. My journey starts from this very moment, and I hope you'll walk with me, because justice isn't a luxury, it's a right for all of us." Let's begin the story. The gentle hum of Los Angeles traffic outside was nearly inaudible as Mare O'Neal stepped out of the car, adjusting her sunglasses beneath the blazing California sun. She had parked a block away, wanting a moment of calm before stepping into the opulent world of this neighborhood, a world that both captivated and alienated her. Before her stood a luxury boutique, an architectural masterpiece of modern glass with the name "I" imprinted in elegant gold letters on the gleaming window. Inside, mannequins were adorned in exquisite gowns, each piece a testament to wealth, exclusivity, and status. Mare took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had come here with a simple goal, to find the perfect dress for her high school winter formal. It wasn't just a dance, it was her first chance to enter a world where her peers would see her as more than just the daughter of Shaquille O'Neal. Despite carrying her famous father's name, Mare was determined to be known for her own accomplishments. She wanted to feel confident, beautiful, and complete at this event. As she opened the door, a soft chime rang, signaling her arrival. The inside was breathtaking. The marble floors glistened under the soft glow of golden lighting, and chrome racks displayed outfits that resembled works of art more than clothing. Mare paused for a moment, inhaling the atmosphere, a subtle fragrance of flowers and citrus mingling with the distant sound of classical music. Despite the luxurious space, an odd unease settled in her chest as the staff passed by her with cold, assessing glances. She wasn't dressed like the other patrons. Her simple athletic wear and sneakers stood out in stark contrast to the sea of high-end garments. She adjusted her ponytail, brushing off the initial stares and reminding herself of why she was there. Behind the counter, a woman who could easily be mistaken for a mannequin stood tall, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit with a pencil skirt, her blonde bob sharply cut. Her name was Sarah Jones, and her expression was as cold and polished as the marble floor beneath her feet. Mare smiled politely, but Sarah merely arched a perfect eyebrow before returning to her tablet, indifferent to the gesture. Unfazed by the dismissive attitude, Mare walked toward a rack of evening gowns. The dresses were beautiful, silky smooth, sparkling satin in every color imaginable. She reached out and touched it. Midnight blue gown, its shimmer reminiscent of the ocean under moonlight. It was perfect. She could already picture herself in it, feeling its soft fabric and the way it would flow as she danced. "Excuse me," she said, turning to Sarah, "could I try this one on?" Sarah didn't look up from her tablet. "Are you sure you're in the right store?" came the voice, dripping with disdain. Mare stood frozen, uncertain if she had heard correctly. The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. She glanced around, half hoping someone else would approach to assist her, but no one was nearby. "I'm sure I'm in the right store," Mare said, keeping her voice calm. "I'd like to try this dress." Finally, Sarah looked up, her gaze narrowing as she scanned Mare from head to toe. It was a slow, deliberate look, one that seemed to scrutinize the very idea of her wearing that dress. "This dress is part of our exclusive collection," Sarah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not everyone is allowed to try it on." A flare of anger ignited within Mare. She stood her ground. "I'm a customer," she replied firmly. "I don't see why I can't try it on." Sarah's lips curled into a tight, insincere smile. "Of course, you're a customer," she said, her tone mocking. "But we have certain protocols when handling such delicate garments. Maybe I can show you something more appropriate. Her words stung. Merera was no stranger to judgment. As the daughter of a famous figure, she had grown accustomed to stereotypes and assumptions. But this was different. This wasn't about her name or family. This was about standing there, in her athletic clothes and sneakers, being deemed unworthy of something simply because of her appearance. Merera took a deep breath, striving to remain calm. I want to try this dress on, she said, her voice resolute, unyielding. Sarah's smile faltered, extinguishing in an instant. She stepped out from behind the counter, the sharp click of her high heels echoing against the marble floor as she approached Merera. Her movements were deliberate, almost predatory, and her voice lowered to a whisper, laced with venom, "Girls like you don't belong here." The words sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, cutting, and dripping with contempt. Merera froze, unable to respond immediately, the meaning of the words slowly sinking in. She clenched her fists, the surge of anger rising within her chest. But before she could speak, Sarah stepped back, her face returning to its cold, impassive mask. "Let me know if you need any more help," she said, her tone final, before turning and walking away. Merera stood motionless, her mind swirling, but she refused to let it defeat her. She wasn't leaving without that dress, or at the very least, without speaking up. As the air around her remained thick with elegance and opulence, Merera felt a fire ignite in her chest. This was no longer just about a dress, it was about asserting herself, about refusing to let anyone make her feel small. The fire within her grew fiercer as she stood there, clutching the midnight blue gown. The soft strains of classical music seemed to mock her, as if the serene atmosphere could erase the sting of Sarah's words. She felt the eyes of the store staff on her, but they only steeled her resolve. She would not back down. Merera walked toward the fitting rooms, the gown draped over her arm. The soft squeak of her sneakers on the marble floor seemed to echo louder in the hushed luxury of the store. Sarah's voice suddenly cut through the stillness, sharp and commanding. "Excuse me, I'm going to have to ask you to stop." Merera turned, meeting Sarah's cold gaze. She stood by the counter, arms crossed, a look of irritation etched on her face. "Sorry," Merera asked, trying to maintain an even tone. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, her voice icy. "That dress is part of our exclusive collection. We don't allow." She paused, eyes narrowing as she searched for the exact words. "Not everyone is allowed to handle these garments." She emphasized the word handle, as if it were a blade aimed directly at Merera's pride. Merera tightened her grip on the fabric of the gown. "I'm not just holding it. I want to try it on," Merera responded, her voice firm. Sarah's gaze flicked to the dress before returning to Merera, her disdain palpable. "So how do you plan on paying for it?" she asked, her voice low but cutting through the air. Merera felt her jaw tighten. "That's none of your business," she snapped back. Sarah took a step closer, the sound of her heels clicking ominously on the marble. She spoke with a threatening edge. "It's my business when someone comes into this store and starts touching items they can't afford." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've seen this before. People like you." Merera's heart pounded in her chest, a searing heat rising to her face, mixing with a blend of anger and disbelief. "People like me?" She wanted to shout, to scream those words back at Sarah, but she held herself in check. Instead, she looked Sarah squarely in the eye, refusing to look away. "I'm not leaving," Merera said, her voice calm despite the storm raging inside her. "I'm going to try on this dress." Sarah's gaze flickered with irritation, but she didn't back down. Instead, she straightened her back, as if preparing for a confrontation. "If you don't put that dress back and leave the store, I'll call security," Sarah said, her tone cold and unyielding. The threat hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Merera could hear the pounding of her heartbeat in her ears, louder than the soft classical music still playing. She looked around the store, meeting the wary eyes of a few customers. Some quickly turned away, pretending not to notice, while others watched, their gazes a mix of curiosity and discomfort. A woman standing near the handbag rack seemed poised to speak, but hesitated, looking at Sarah before turning back to the merchandise. No one would intervene, Mayor Era realized. She was on her own. No! Mayor Era shouted, her voice ringing out across the store, drawing the attention of everyone present. You will not call security. I'm a customer, and I have every right to try on this dress. For a brief moment, the coldness in Sarah's expression faltered. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing again, her anger evident. You're causing a scene, she said through gritted teeth. I'm asking you to leave before this goes any further. Marrera's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the fury coursing through her. She would not let this woman intimidate her. Not today. Not ever. You're the one making this tense, Marrera shot back, her voice steely. I'm just picking a dress, and yet you're making assumptions about me, and honestly, I'm tired of it. Sarah stepped closer, her face darkening, and for a brief moment, Marrera thought she might back down. But then Sarah's hand shot out, yanking the dress from Marrera's grasp. Give it to me, Sarah snapped, pulling the dress forcefully. Marrera refused to let go, clutching the dress tightly. What's your problem? Marrera shouted, her voice rising. You can't just snatch things out of other people's hands like that. I can, when I'm protecting the store's property, Sarah retorted, her grip tightening on the dress as she tugged harder. The fabric slipped from Marrera's hands, the soft material crumpling in Sarah's grip. Marrera barely had time to react before Sarah's hand swung upward, delivering a sharp slap across her cheek, a resounding slap echoing through the quiet of the store. The sound of the slap reverberated throughout the shop, freezing the entire space. Marrera staggered back a step, her hand instinctively going to her cheek, momentarily unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her cheek burned, both from the slap and the humiliation. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide in shock, as if she couldn't believe what she had just done. The store fell into an uncomfortable silence, with only the faint classical music playing from the speakers. Marrera's mind whirled, and she felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them fall. She wiped them away, determined not to let Sarah see her cry. Instead, she took a deep breath, her hand balling into a fist at her side. You just slapped me, Marrera said, her voice trembling with both surprise and anger. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She stood there, still clutching the dress as though it was her lifeline. You just slapped me, Marrera repeated, louder this time, her voice breaking, but she didn't care. She wanted everyone in the store to hear. You think you can treat people like this and get away with it? Around her, customers looked at Marrera, their gazes a mix of shock and discomfort. No one moved, no one spoke. Marrera could feel their eyes on her, but no one stepped forward to intervene. Sarah finally regained her composure. She straightened, her face becoming a mask of cold detachment. I'm asking you to leave, Sarah said, her voice tight and controlled. You are no longer welcome in this store. Marrera's eyes burned with fury, but she stood firm, refusing to let her tears fall. She took another deep breath, forcing herself to stand tall, not allowing Sarah to see her weakness. Fine, Marrera said, her voice low but resolute, but this isn't over. She turned and marched toward the door, the sound of her sneakers clicking sharply on the marble floor. As she neared the exit, she glanced back. Sarah was still standing there, in the middle of the store, clutching the midnight blue dress. The luxurious interior of the store seemed to shrink around Marrera as she pushed the door open, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The warmth of the California sun eased the sting on her cheek, but it did nothing to quell the storm raging within her. She stood on the sidewalk, her hand trembling as the adrenaline surged through her. Her cheek still burned from the slap, but the deeper wound was the humiliation, the anger building up inside her. The unforgiving California sun blazed down on her as she pulled her phone from her pocket. The reflection on the screen showed her fiery eyes and the faint red mark on her cheek. For a moment, she hesitated, her finger hovering over the camera icon. Sharing what had just happened made her feel vulnerable, like exposing herself to the judgmental eyes of millions. But then she remembered Sarah's arrogant face, her mocking words, "People like you." No, she wouldn't let this moment pass in silence. She tapped the camera app and switched to video mode. Her voice was steady, though there was a slight quiver beneath the surface. "I'm Shaquille O'Neal," she began, holding the phone at arm's length to capture both her face and the elegant store behind her. "This is what happens when you walk into a store, and someone decides you don't belong here. Today, a woman in this store didn't just insult me, she slapped me." She let those words linger in the air for a moment, the pain in her cheeks still throbbing as if to emphasize the point. "People need to see this," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Because it's not just me. This happens to people every day, to those who don't have a voice, who don't have a platform. And it's time we hold people like this accountable." She stopped the video and immediately uploaded it to her social media account. The caption was brief but powerful. "This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been treated like this. #StandUp, #SayNoToDiscrimination." When Shaquille hit post, a small part of her hesitated, wondering what would come next. She had grown up in the public eye, every move scrutinized due to her father's fame. But this time, it wasn't about him. This time, it was about her and about something bigger than any one individual. The notification came almost immediately, a flood of comments and shares pouring in faster than she could handle. Her following, bolstered by her father's reputation and her own growing presence, was furious. Support messages flooded in, but so did the trolls, just as she had expected. The internet was never short on pessimists. Still holding her phone, Shaquille began walking, her sneakers hitting the pavement with purpose, her gaze as resolute as her steps. She replayed the events of the day in her mind, each insult, each cold stare, every moment Sarah had tried to diminish her. Each memory looped in her head, feeding the rising anger. She wouldn't let this go easily. Hours later, Shaquille sat cross-legged on her bed, the light from her phone illuminating the dark room. Her video had gone viral, millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. Celebrities began sharing her post, adding their voices to the growing wave of outrage. Activists, influencers, even strangers shared their own stories of discrimination, turning Shaquille's video into a rallying cry. Another notification caught her attention, a direct message from her best friend, Lila. "OMG Shaquille, I just saw your video, are you okay? What happened?" Shaquille hesitated for a moment before replying. How could she explain it? She didn't want to seem weak, but she couldn't downplay it either. Finally she typed, "I'm okay now, but it was really bad, Lila. She slapped me, actually slapped me." The reply came almost immediately, "Oh my God, that's insane. You have to do something, like legal action or something." Shaquille stared at the message, the idea of legal action beginning to form in her mind. Should she go that route? The instinct to fight was strong, but the thought of facing lawsuits, the media, and endless questions made her feel uneasy. She wasn't afraid of confrontation, but this was bigger than she had imagined, bigger than just her. And was that the point? It wasn't just about her, it was about setting a precedent, standing up for everyone who couldn't defend themselves. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her father. Shaquille hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. She knew what he would say. He wanted to protect her, shield her from the backlash. But Shaquille didn't want protection, she wanted justice. Finally, she answered the call. "Hi, Dad." Shaquille O'Neal's voice came through, deep and familiar. "I just saw your video, are you okay? What happened?" She took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the day, from the moment she walked into the store. Her voice wavered slightly as she described the slap, the shock still fresh in her mind. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before her father spoke again, his voice tight, barely containing his anger. "She slapped you?" he asked, the words heavy. "She actually hit you?" "Yes," Shaquille replied softly. "I'm coming over." His tone was firm, brooking no argument. "We're not letting this slide." When Shaquille arrived at Shaquille's apartment later that night, his towering figure filled the doorway. As large as his presence was, his first step was to embrace Shaquille, pulling her into a tight hug as though to shield her from the world. "I'm proud of you," he said softly, "for standing up for yourself. But we're going further than this. They won't get away with it." Merera nodded, her resolve growing stronger with him by her side. Together, they began to make a plan. Shaquille called his legal team, while Merera reached out to the activists and influencers who had voiced their support online. They decided the next step was to expose the store's history, because if Sarah treated Merera like this, she had likely done the same to others. In the days that followed, the pressure mounted. Media outlets picked up the story, and more people spoke out about their experiences at the store. An anonymous former employee shared that Sarah had a history of discrimination, revealing eerie stories that mirrored Merera's experience. Merera maintained her presence on social media, sharing updates and amplifying the voices of others. She was determined not to let the story veer away from the larger issue of systemic discrimination. This wasn't just her story, it was about a culture that allowed people like Sarah to act unchecked. The turning point came when the store's corporate office released a statement. They apologized for the incident, announcing that Sarah had been suspended pending an investigation and promised to implement diversity training for employees. But for Merera, that wasn't enough. Words were easy, but actions were what truly mattered. As she sat at her desk late into the night, drafting another post, a wave of resolve surged within her. This wasn't over. It couldn't end like this. She was just getting started. The next morning, Merera woke to the sound of her phone ringing incessantly on the table beside her bed. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications, messages, DMs, and calls. Her video had become an overnight sensation, and now it seemed like the whole world was watching. She unlocked her phone and immediately noticed the difference. News headlines flooded social media platforms, all carrying her name. Shaquille O'Neal's daughter shares horrifying story of discrimination at upscale store, and Shaq's daughter speaks out against racism at luxury store. The comments on her video had shifted entirely. People weren't just reacting to the incident, they were reacting to her identity. Her heart sank. This was exactly what she hadn't wanted. The story was no longer about the systemic issue, it was about her relationship with fame. She set the phone down and ran a hand through her hair, frustration welling up inside her. This wasn't about her father. It was about standing up against discrimination. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Merera opened it to find her father standing there, his face determined. Though it was early morning, he was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his towering frame filling the doorway. "Hey, baby girl," Shaquille said, stepping inside. He glanced at her phone, still buzzing loudly on the table. "You've seen the headlines, haven't you?" Merera nodded, folding her arms across her chest. "This isn't how I wanted it to go, Dad. Now people are only focusing on the fact that I'm your daughter, not the actual issue." Shaquille placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Listen, you didn't choose to be my daughter, but you've chosen to stand up for what's right. That's what people will remember. And if my name helps bring attention to this story, then so be it. We'll use it to our advantage." Merera sighed, the irritation beginning to shift into resolve. He was right. If the attention was already there, she would use it to push the message further. "All right," she said finally. "What's the next step?" Within hours, Shaquille had mobilized his network. His legal team was ready, drafting statements and preparing to escalate the issue if necessary. Meanwhile, Merera worked with a PR firm to organize a press conference. She hated the idea of stepping into the spotlight, but if it could help bring people like Sarah into the light, it was worth it. By midday, the press conference was set up right outside Shaquille's mansion. A podium was placed in the middle of the yard, surrounded by neatly arranged microphones. Journalists gathered, cameras pointed toward the O'Neal family as they stepped up to the podium. Merera stood beside her father, her heart pounding as she faced the crowd. Shaquille began, his voice deep and commanding, immediately capturing the attention of everyone present. "Good afternoon. I'm here today not as an NBA player, not as a public figure, but as a father who has witnessed his daughter endure something no one should ever have to go through." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. This is not just Merera's story. It's the story of thousands, millions of people who face discrimination every day with no platform to speak up. Today, we are demanding accountability, not just from one person or one store, but from a system that allows this behavior to continue. Stepped up to the podium, her hand gripping the edge as she fought to maintain her composure. Her voice trembled at first, but with each word, it grew stronger. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that tells people they don't belong here, that they are not good enough simply because of how they look or where they come from. I am here to say enough is enough. Her words rang out, sparking a wave of applause from the crowd. Reporters hurried to ask questions, but Shaquille raised his hand, signaling the end of the press conference. The message had been delivered, clear and powerful. That day, the public's response was overwhelming. Upscale image. The store's corporate office issued a second, more detailed statement, expressing deep regret over the incident. They confirmed Sarah's suspension and announced plans to review their hiring process and customer service policies. But for Mayor Era, that still wasn't enough. Apologies were just words. She wanted to see real change. That evening, as Mayor Era scrolled through the countless messages on her phone, she paused at one direct message from a young girl, no older than 15. Thank you for sharing your story. I've been through something similar, and when I saw you stand up for yourself, I felt like I could do the same. Tears welled in Marrera's eyes. This was why she was doing this, for all the people who had been overlooked, made to feel invisible. She screenshot the message and sent it to her father, with a simple caption, "This is the reason." Shaquille responded almost immediately, "I'm proud of you, baby girl. This is just the beginning." The next day, Marrera sat down for an exclusive interview with a renowned journalist. She recounted the incident in vivid detail, her voice steady and unshaken. She didn't just talk about what had happened to her, she spoke about the larger issue of systemic discrimination in retail. "What do you hope to achieve by speaking out?" the journalist asked, leaning forward. Marrera didn't hesitate. "I want accountability. I want people to know they don't have to accept treatment like this, and I want businesses to understand they can't keep ignoring these issues. It's time for change." The interview aired that evening, and the response was swift. Social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForMarrera and #EndDiscrimination. The movement had taken on a life of its own, and Marrera found herself at its center. That night, as she sat on her bed scrolling through the events of the day, a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected washed over her. This had become bigger than her. It was no longer just a personal fight, it was a movement, and she was ready to continue this journey. Her phone buzzed with another message from her father. "Tomorrow we'll talk strategy. It's time to make this something bigger." Marrera smiled, her resolve only strengthened. This wasn't just about fighting discrimination, it was about making sure no one else had to fight alone. The next morning, Marrera stood in front of the mirror, preparing for what lay ahead. Today, she and her father would return to the store, not as customers, but as forces demanding justice. The events of the past few days had evolved into something beyond anything Marrera had imagined, but now, as she prepared to face Sarah Jones again, she felt a combination of fiery anger and unshakable determination in her chest. Shaquille O'Neal was already waiting, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a stern resolve. His presence had always been commanding, but today, he wasn't just a towering man, he was a father on a mission, and his focus only sharpened Marrera's determination. "Are you ready?" Shaquille asked as she joined him in the living room. "As ready as I'll ever be," Marrera replied, her voice steady, though a slight flutter of nerves remained in her stomach. "Remember, this isn't just about you," Shaquille said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "This is to set an example. You've done an incredible job by speaking out, but now we need to show them that this isn't just going to be swept under the rug." They left the house together, stepping into the sleek black SUV parked in the driveway. As the car sped toward the store, Marrera scrolled through her phone, watching as hashtags and messages flooded social media. People were demanding action not just against Sarah, but also against the larger culture that had allowed such behavior to exist. When they arrived at the store, the scene outside was a stark contrast to the quiet luxury Marrera had experienced just days before. A small crowd of reporters and onlookers had gathered, cameras trained on the front door. Marrera felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest, but she reminded herself of why she was here. Shaquille stepped out of the car first, his massive frame immediately drawing attention. Flashbulbs erupted, and voices called out his name, but he paid no mind, extending a hand to help Mayor Era from the vehicle. Together, they walked into the store, the glass door chiming softly as it swung open. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Employees glanced up, their faces filled with anxiety and unease. Mayor Era noted the absence of Sarah Jones behind the counter, but before she could think more on it, a man in a well-tailored suit approached. He introduced himself as the store's regional manager, his expression calm but strained. "Mr. O'Neal, Ms. O'Neal," the man began, his voice polite yet edged with tension. "We've been expecting you. Please follow me, we can talk privately." Shaquille's face hardened. "We'll talk," he replied in a deep, commanding tone. "But I want Sarah here. She's the one who needs to take responsibility for her actions." The regional manager hesitated, glancing toward an office nearby. After a moment, he nodded and gestured for someone to fetch Sarah. Minutes later, Sarah Jones entered the room, her usual cold confidence now visibly shaken. She still looked impeccably dressed, but her gait was uncertain in a way Mayor Era hadn't seen before. Her eyes flicked quickly toward Mayor Era before settling on the regional manager, as though hoping to avoid the confrontation. "Sarah," the regional manager said, his voice firm. "This is the O'Neal family. I believe you're familiar with them." Sarah's jaw tightened, and she forced a reluctant smile. "Yes, of course." Mayor Era stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. "You know exactly why I'm here," she said, her voice cutting through the space like a knife. "What you did to me was not just disrespect. It was violence, racism, and completely unacceptable." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Shaquille raised a hand, halting her. "You slapped my daughter," he said, his tone calm but laced with simmering rage. "You humiliated her and thought you'd get away with it. But you were wrong." The mask Sarah had carefully constructed began to crack. I was just doing my job," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean." "Didn't mean what?" Mayor Era interrupted, her voice rising. "Didn't mean to insult me? Didn't mean to make assumptions about me just because of how I look? Didn't mean to attack me because you thought you could get away with it?" Sarah's face turned crimson, and she looked toward the regional manager, as if seeking support. But he remained silent, his expression unreadable. Shaquille stepped closer, his towering presence casting a shadow. The pressure radiated from every step he took. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice booming like thunder. "This won't end here. You can't treat people like this and hide behind excuses. My daughter stands here today because she refuses to let this happen to anyone else, and I'll stand by her." Sarah's composure shattered completely. I'm sorry," she said hurriedly, her voice weak, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't think." Mayor Era raised a hand, stopping her. "Sorry no longer means anything," she said coldly. "What I want, what everyone watching wants, is accountability. Not just from you, but from this entire company." The regional manager finally spoke, his voice full of resolve. "Ms. O'Neal, I want to assure you that we take this matter very seriously. Sarah has been suspended, and we are reviewing our policies and training programs. We're also committed to implementing new measures to ensure this doesn't happen again." Mayor Era narrowed her eyes, listening intently to every word. "Words are easy," she said, her tone sharp. "But actions speak louder. You really want change, make those measures public. Show your customers and your employees that this behavior will not be tolerated." The regional manager nodded, his expression sincere. "I promise you, we will do that," the regional manager said with a measured tone. Shaquille placed a hand on Marrera's shoulder, signaling that it was time to leave. "We'll be watching," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "If you don't follow through, we will speak up again." As they stepped out of the store, Marrera felt a fleeting sense of satisfaction, though the discomfort lingered. This confrontation was only a small step in a much larger battle. She knew there was still much work to be done, but now she could take pride in having stood firm. Outside, the reporters exploded with questions as they exited the store. Mare paused and turned to face them. "This is not just about me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is about demanding accountability and ensuring no one else has to endure what I did. And we've only just begun." As Mare and Shaquille headed toward the car, she could feel a new purpose forming within her. The fight was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. In the days that followed the confrontation at the store, everything seemed to spiral into a whirlwind. Mare realized that she had become the center of a movement, one that extended far beyond her personal story. The video of the initial encounter, coupled with the press conference and her father's public support, had sparked a global conversation about discrimination, privilege, and the unseen struggles of those without a platform to speak. Mare sat in her room, scrolling through the messages on her phone. Each notification brought a mix of emotions. There were supportive messages from strangers thanking her for her courage, along with stories from others who had faced similar injustices, each one a painful reminder of why she had decided to speak out. And then there were the provocations, the angry, shallow voices attempting to diminish her experience. But Mare had grown up in the public eye. She knew how to handle that kind of negativity. What mattered most was the overwhelming support and the opportunity to create real change. Her phone buzzed, an incoming call from her father. "Mara," Shaquille's deep voice echoed through the line, "we need to take this to the next level." "What do you mean?" Mare asked, leaning back against the bed's headboard. "You've started something bigger than just a viral video," Shaquille said. "People are listening. It's time to turn this momentum into real change. I've got people who want to help." The next day, Mare and Shaquille met with a group of human rights activists, social justice experts, and public relations professionals at Shaquille's home. The room was filled with energy as they discussed ways to amplify Mare's message and use her platform to drive systemic change. One of the activists, a middle-aged woman named Tina Roberts, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Mare," she said, her voice calm, "your story is powerful because it's personal. But if we want to create lasting change, we have to connect it to a larger narrative. This isn't just about one store or one manager, it's about a culture of discrimination that exists in many spaces." Mare nodded, absorbing Tina's words. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We start by gathering more stories," Tina replied. "If people see that this isn't an isolated incident, they'll be more willing to demand change. And we can use those stories to push for better policies, not just in retail but in workplaces, schools, everywhere." Another activist, a young man named Dylan, spoke up. "We should also create a resource for people facing discrimination, legal support, OT assistance, even just a place to share their experiences. You've already attracted attention, now it's time to build something lasting." Shaquille spoke up, his voice strong and unwavering. "Whatever we do, it has to be big. People are watching. Give them something they can rally behind." In the weeks that followed, Mare poured herself into the work. She and her team launched the campaign, #StandUpTogether, a platform encouraging people to share their discrimination experiences and providing resources for those who needed help. Stories poured in, thousands of them, each one a testament to the widespread nature of prejudice. Mare began speaking more in public, participating in interviews, panel discussions, and live social media broadcasts. Every time she told her story, she felt the mix of vulnerability and strength. Reliving those painful moments was not easy, but she knew it was necessary. Her voice was reaching people, and that was what mattered most. A particularly powerful moment occurred during a live broadcast with a group of young women who had experienced similar struggles. As they shared their stories, Mare listened intently, her heart aching for each one of them. "I understand how hard it is to stand up," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "It's terrifying to feel like you're alone, like no one will believe you. But you're not alone. We're all here together, and the more we speak out, the harder it will be for them to ignore us." The broadcast went viral, generating waves of support and media attention. But Mare wasn't interested in fame, she wanted to see real change. One evening, as Mayor Era sat at her desk reviewing plans for the next phase of the campaign, her phone buzzed with a message from Tina. The message contained a link to an article about a high-end retailer that had announced significant policy changes following Marrera's story. The company had committed to diversity training, creating a more inclusive hiring process, and implementing a zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination. Marrera felt a surge of hope. This was what she had fought for: real, tangible change. She forwarded the article to her father with a simple message: "We're making progress." Shaquille replied almost immediately, "I'm proud of you, but we're not done yet." As weeks turned into months, Marrera's campaign continued to grow. She partnered with legal organizations to offer free consultations for victims of discrimination. She worked with schools and community groups to promote education about bias and inclusion. And throughout it all, she kept telling her story, ensuring the momentum never faded. But it wasn't just the big victories that mattered. Marrera was deeply moved by the smaller moments. Private messages from strangers telling her that her story had inspired them to stand up for themselves. Parents thanking her for being a role model for their children. These were the moments that reminded her why she started this journey. One day, as Marrera scrolled through the campaign website, she came across a story from a young woman in a small town who had faced discrimination at her workplace. The woman wrote about feeling powerless until she watched Marrera's video. Inspired, she confronted her manager and filed a formal complaint, which led to a change in the company's policies. Marrera felt tears stinging her eyes as she read the story. This was why everything mattered: empowering people to stand up for themselves and demand a better future. She screenshot the story and sent it to Tina with a message: "This is why we keep going." Tina replied, "And this is just the beginning." Marrera smiled, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew the fight was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they were making a difference. One voice, one story, one step at a time. The warm California sun filtered through the trees as Marrera and Shaquille stood in front of a large field in downtown Los Angeles. White tents lined the sides, bustling with volunteers setting up racks of clothing, tables full of shoes, and boxes of accessories. The air was electric with energy and anticipation. Today marked the culmination of all their efforts, a major community event to give back, amplify voices, and provide tangible support for those in need. Marrera walked alongside her father, her eyes scanning the preparations. She still couldn't believe how far things had come since that fateful day at the store. What had started as a personal challenge had evolved into a movement of unity and action. Now, standing amid it all, she felt immense pride, not for herself, but for the countless people who had joined her in this mission. "It looks great," Shaquille said, his voice carrying over the noise. "This is what really matters." Marrera nodded, a small smile curling on her lips. "It's amazing. I just hope this makes a difference." "It already has," Shaquille replied, gesturing toward the growing crowd. Families, individuals, and children had begun to gather, their faces a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. "You've given people hope, Mara. That's bigger than any store." The official program began with Marrera's speech on a makeshift stage in the middle of the field. She looked out at the crowd, a sea of diverse, vibrant faces, all united by a common purpose. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady and clear. "When this journey started, it was just about one unjust moment. But what I've learned is that my story isn't unique. It's one among countless stories of people who have been judged, overlooked, or excluded just for being who they are." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Today, we are here to say enough. We are here to act, not just with words, but with deeds. This is not just about one person or one movement. It's about creating a world where everyone feels valued, respected, and seen." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marrera stepped back, her chest swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. Shaquille took the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention as he grabbed the microphone. "This is about community," Shaquille said, his voice resonating across the field. "This is about lifting each other up and ensuring no one gets left behind. Marrera taught me that Even the smallest actions can spark something big. So, let's keep the fire burning, let's keep pushing, and let's make sure this isn't just a moment, but a movement. The event buzzed throughout the day. Volunteers distributed clothes, helping families find what they needed. A local food company donated hot meals, setting up a buffet where attendees could enjoy a free meal. Community organizations set up booths offering services, from job training to mental health resources. Mayor Era moved through the tents, interacting with participants and listening to their stories. A woman approached, holding the hand of her young daughter. "Thank you for doing this," the woman said, her voice full of emotion. "We've been through so much, and it means so much to see people care." Mayor Era smiled warmly, kneeling to speak to the little girl. "What's your name?" she asked. "Emily," the girl replied, her voice shy. "Well, Emily," Mayor Era said, "I'm so glad you're here. You'll look amazing in anything you choose today." The girl beamed, and her mother quietly echoed her thanks before walking away. Moments like this reminded Mayor Era why this work mattered. It wasn't just about grand gestures. It was about the human connections that sparked change. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the event, Shaquille gathered the volunteers and attendees for one final moment of reflection. Standing in the middle of the field, he held up a large whiteboard with bold black lettering. "A world without bias starts with us. This is our pledge." His voice was firm and resolute. "We will continue to fight, continue to build, and continue to believe in a better future. But we cannot do it alone. We all need each other." The crowd responded with a cheer. Mayor Era felt a familiar sting at the corners of her eyes. She glanced at her father, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Together, they raised the sign high, a symbol of hope and determination. As the event began to wind down, Mayor Era sat on the edge of the stage, watching families leave with bags of clothes and uplifted spirits. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing they had made a tangible difference. Tina Roberts, one of the key activists in the campaign, walked over to her, holding a cup of coffee. "You did great today," Tina said, her voice warm. "We all did," Mayor Era replied. "But there's still so much to do." "Always," Tina smiled. "But you've shown everyone that change is possible. This is just the beginning." Mayor Era nodded, her gaze drifting over the field. The fight wasn't over, and it never would be, but today they had taken one more step forward, and that was enough, for now. That evening, as Mayor Era and Shaquille returned home, they sat together in the living room, reflecting on the day. "You made me proud, my love," Shaquille said, his voice soft. "Not just for what you've done, but for who you are." Mayor Era leaned her head on her father's shoulder, her heart full. "Thank you, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." He chuckled softly. "That's what family's for." As the house grew quiet, Mayor Era felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. The journey had been difficult, but it had also transformed her. And though the road ahead would be long, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. Together, they had ignited a fire greater than themselves, a movement that would continue to grow, fueled by the voices and stories of countless others. And in that, Mayor Era found hope for the future. The story reminds us of the power of unity, the belief in change, and standing up for what's right. Have you ever faced a challenge and found the strength to overcome it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice can inspire and create positive change in the community. If you found this story meaningful, don't hesitate to share it with friends and loved ones to spread the message of unity and hope. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.